Good evening. As we go through our everyday lives, we encounter tens to hundreds to possibly thousands of people that we do not personally know. We shake hands with strangers, make small talk in the elevator. We arrange meetings with clients, friends. We even go as far as pressing buttons on our phone so that we can get into a stranger's car for a ride to our destinations. We never expect that those chance meetings could be our last. It doesn't even cross our minds that we may never make it back home. So tonight, I will be joined by a very good friend of mine, Curious Raven, as we look into two missing persons cases that have yet to be solved. Joan Risch, born Joan Carolyn Bard, was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1930. At the age of 9, her family moved to New Jersey. A mere 10 years later, one day while Joan was at school, her family home caught fire and her parents were both killed. After this event, she was sent to live with an aunt and uncle that she was not well acquainted with. They formally adopted her soon after. After dealing with such a terrible tragedy at a young age, she struggled to adjust to life with her new family, but was still able to do well in school, and even went as far as getting an English literature degree from Wilson College in Pennsylvania. After graduation, she worked in publishing and eventually worked up to being an editorial assistant. In 1956, she married Martin Risch, and eventually moved on to become a stay-at-home mother. Soon after, in April of 1961, the Risch family moved to Lincoln, Massachusetts. The morning of October 24th, 1961, started the same as always. Martin left that morning for a business trip to go to New York, and Joan made breakfast for their children, Lillian and David. After breakfast, Joan took her 2-year-old son to the neighbor's house, while she took her daughter to a dentist appointment. After the appointment, they went to a department store, and then Joan picked up David at the neighbor's home and returned back to her home a little after 11 a.m. She then made lunch and put her son down for a nap, and around 1 p.m., the neighbor, Barbara Barker, brought her 4-year-old son, Douglas, over to play with Lillian. Shortly before 2 in the afternoon, Joan took her daughter Lillian and the neighbor kid, Douglas, back to the Barker house, and then stated that she would be coming back soon. About a quarter of an hour later, Ms. Barker stated that she had seen Joan wearing a trench coat and carrying something red in her arms, while in a hurry to get to her garage from her car. At the time, Miss Barker really didn't think too much of it. She assumed that she was rushing to catch David, her young son, as he ran away from her. This simple moment in time, it would be the last confirmed sighting of Joan Risch. At around 3:40, Ms. Barker went to take Lillian back home so that she could run errands. At the time, she didn't see Joan, but assumed that she was home, so she left without a second thought. When she returned about 35 minutes later, Lillian walked back over to Ms. Barker's house and explained to her that Mommy's gone and the kitchen is covered in red paint. She also told her that David was crying in his crib because he needed a diaper change. Ms. Barker, confused by the child's statements, went over to the house to see what was going on. When she entered, she saw that the kitchen was in fact covered in blood, and she proceeded to call the police. Within 5 minutes, the police arrived, specifically Sergeant Mike McHugh. When he looked over the scene, he found that there was a small overturned table and blood smears on the kitchen floors and walls. The trash can, which was normally under the sink, was in the middle of the floor, and in the trash can was the Risch's home phone, which had been ripped from its mount on the wall. The initial thought of McHugh's investigation was that this was going to end up a suicide, and he began to search the house. After a while, when his search had resulted without a body, he called for backup so that they could extend the search. They contacted local hospitals to see if she had been checked in somewhere for medical attention, but she was seemingly nowhere to be found. They then contacted Martin, her husband, whom had been out of town, and informed him of the situation. He booked the next flight home. The detectives' search netted some strange findings. A telephone book opened to a page where one would write emergency contact information, but there was no information written in it. There were empty liquor and beer bottles in the trash can, and Martin vouched for the liquor bottle, stating that he and his wife had finished it the night before. He, however, had no idea where the beer bottles had come from. The trench coat mentioned before was also left behind, as well as her purse. It was determined that she would have less than $10 with her at the time of her disappearance, meaning she wouldn't have the financial means to run away. The overturned table that was found in the hallways was normally underneath the now unmounted phone. In the kitchen, there was a wad of paper towels that had been used to clean up some blood on the floor. In addition to this, there was also a pair of coveralls that belonged to David found in the kitchen. They were bloody, and were likely used to try to clean up the blood. It was indicated that the coveralls appeared to have been held against the ground by something heavy, such as a body, for a long period of time. There were also various amounts of blood, mostly drops, found in various places throughout the house. On the first step leading upstairs, the master bedroom, the window in the children's room, there was also a trail of blood that led from the kitchen outside to the car, which was still in the driveway. Even more blood evidence was found on said car, on the right fender, the left side of the hood, and the center of the trunk. All of this painted a potentially horrifying scene. Clearly, something had happened, but nobody knew what. There was blood, sure, but it wasn't enough to be fatal, and the blood evidence was seemingly all over the place. There was no rhyme nor reason to where it went or where investigators should go with it. The search for Joan continued into her neighborhood. Police went door to door questioning the neighbors to see if they had seen anything, and some claimed they had. One of her neighbors claimed that they had seen Joan, or at least a woman that looked like her, walking along Route 2A West, which was about 200 yards beyond her house, with a handkerchief wrapped around her head. They stated that she seemed to be hunched over and walking aimlessly, and that she looked disheveled. The sighting was at 2:45 on that afternoon, and this would have been about half an hour after Miss Barker saw her rushing around outside of her house. About half an hour later, a similar-looking woman had been seen walking on Route 128 down the median in Waltham. It was reported that she had blood on her leg and looked disoriented as she cradled an unknown object. The sightings continued at 4:30 p.m. of a woman on Route 128. The witness stated that she had something dark on her legs that appeared to be mud, and she was walking hunched over with both of her hands in her pockets. The only other thing to note that was witnessed by neighbors was a two-tone car that had been in the area that stood out. One witness stated that the car had been parked alongside the road at around 2:45 that day. The milkman claimed that he had seen the car in the Risch's driveway around 5 days prior, and that it was occupied by a man. He then stated that he saw the man get out of the car, cut a few branches from a bush in their yard, put them into the car, and then leave. One last bit of information that made this case even more bizarre. About a month prior to her disappearance, Joan had checked out a book from the local library. That book was titled Into Thin Air, and is about a woman who leaves behind blood smears and a towel when she goes missing. A story with eerie similarity to Joan's own disappearance. After a bit more digging, it was actually found that Joan had checked out 25 books from the library that year, and most of them had to do with murders and missing persons cases. Based on all this information, it's difficult to really assess the situation or what actually happened. It is possible that Joan ran away voluntarily and staged the scene to look like a crime had occurred based on a story that she had read. It's possible that this was the reason for her dropping off her daughter and her friend back at the neighbor's house. But if she was thinking about leaving and never coming back, why would she leave her 2-year-old home alone? There are, of course, several theories ranging from a possible affair with the man in the two-tone car and her running away with him. The possibility that she was having an affair and wanted to break it off, and maybe he became violent. There are some that say it was possible the husband had come back and done it, though that is nearly impossible with him having to fly back home. Another speculation was that she was injured and disoriented while walking along Route 128, which was under construction, and that she may have fallen into a pit on the road and passed away, and was then unknowingly buried. Unfortunately, this is a situation where everyone can speculate about the possibilities, but odds are, we will never know what happened to Joan Risch, and the case remains unsolved to this day.
Brian Schaffer was born on February 25, 1979, and was a medical student that attended Ohio State University. Brian grew up in Pickerington, Ohio, a suburb of Columbus, and was the oldest of 2 sons to his parents, Randy and Renee Schaffer. He graduated high school in 1997, and from there he went into his undergraduate degree at OSU, graduating 6 years later with a degree in microbiology. After this achievement, he continued on into the OSU College of Medicine in 2004. 2 years after enrolling, his mother, Renee Schaffer, sadly passed away from myelodysplasia, a type of blood cancer. And while his friends all claimed that he was handling the death well, it was noticed that it was tremendously difficult for him to accept. During this time in med school, Brian became romantically involved with another student, Alexis Wagner, to the point that it was anticipated that he would be proposing to her later in 2006. During a trip to Miami that the couple had planned for their spring break getaway in April, Schaffer was known to enjoy the tropical and laid-back lifestyle, and despite the fact that he was a med student and had a promising career ahead of him, it was well known to his friends and family that he wanted to actually be a musician. All of this is to show that Brian had an incredibly promising future. Everything looked bright for him, and there was almost nothing standing in his way. While losing his mother had hurt him, he showed that he was resilient. He pressed on in his studies, and he had fallen in love with another student. All of this pointing to the fact that Brian was strapped in for the long ride that is life. The night of April 1st, 2006 started like any other. Nothing about it seemed to be out of the ordinary for anyone involved. Brian went out to dinner with his father, Randy, and his younger brother, Derek. After that, Brian decided that he wanted to have a boys' night out with his good friend and former roommate, Clint Florence. The two of them opted to spend the evening at the Ugly Tuna Saloon bar in the middle of an incredibly busy district of Columbus, Ohio, during the beginning of spring break. They arrived at the saloon at around 9 p.m. Within the hour, Schaffer actually called his girlfriend Alexis, who was in Toledo at the time visiting her family, before the two of them were set to go on their aforementioned Miami vacation. He told her he loved her and that he was just out with friends, and the call ended as any call would. But from here, Brian and Clint went bar hopping, visiting a number of the packed bars and working their way down towards the arena district. According to Clint, at each of the stops, the men would have one shot of hard liquor, and then they would move on from there. While they were doing their rounds, they ran into an old friend of Clint's, Meredith Reed. Reed spent some time with them at the bar they had met in. They drank some more, and then Reed offered to take the two men back to the Ugly Tuna Saloon, a ride that they accepted. At 1:15 a.m., the trio was caught on camera entering the building and riding the escalator up towards the second floor. At some point after they arrived, Brian had gotten separated from the group, but was still in the bar. Just before 2 a.m., Brian was also caught on cameras talking to two women in the bar, but was then caught once again on camera. Then at 2 a.m., when the bars closed, Meredith and Clint waited by the door for Brian, after having called him several times without answer. When he wasn't in the crowd as the bar closed, they assumed he had gone back to his apartment and just didn't tell anyone. What they didn't know was that Brian would never be seen again. Alexis and Randy, his father, attempted calling Brian, but there was no answer. Then on Monday morning, Brian was nowhere to be seen when it was time for the flight to Miami. This was when he was reported as missing to the Ohio police. As stated, this is where the disappearance and the investigation starts to really pull into the strange territory. The fact that Brian never showed up for the flight to Miami was the first indication that something had happened. As mentioned prior, it was known to others that during this vacation, Brian had planned to propose to his girlfriend. This vacation was more or less intended to be the event that led up them being engaged. When the investigation began, police found Brian's car in the parking lot of his apartment complex, which was close to the Ugly Tuna Saloon. The police launched a citywide search, including dumpsters and sewers, noting that the saloon was in a high crime area, so the concern of foul play was a serious one. And while this may be true, there was one detail that baffled everyone involved. This was a high traffic area, and there were cameras almost everywhere. Brian was caught on camera entering with his friends. He was caught on camera talking with two women before the bars closed, but at no point in time did the cameras catch him actually leaving the bar. The police launched a full-scale investigation, knocking on doors, digging in dumpsters, and asking anyone and everyone if they had any information. They questioned Brian's friends and family, they searched the shelters and hospitals, and in the end result was always the same. Nobody knew where Brian was, and he had managed to disappear without a trace. As time passed, there were small glimmers of hope, but nothing actually came from any of it. There was a computer glitch that made it seem like his cell phone had been turned on. His apartment was broken into in an unrelated burglary, and even Pearl Jam's Eddie Vedder put out a plea to anyone that had information at a concert. All of this led nowhere. The investigation went in every direction, from psychics saying he was in a riverbed to sleuths claiming that he was a victim of the smiley face killer, who was known to attack intoxicated men in the Midwest. Every single lead meant more hope that was squashed. Every call meant another potential hint that ultimately hit another dead end. There was even one instance of a young woman reporting a dark-haired man that looked like Brian working a drive-thru in a fast food restaurant in Michigan. A tip that ended with the Michigan police confirming that it wasn't him. There were sightings investigated in Michigan, Texas, and even Sweden, none of which actually were Brian. There were a few oddities that could be looked at as possibilities. For one, Clint was the only person questioned that refused to take a lie detector test. I'm not looking to paint Clint as a suspect here. It's just a point to note, and he's well within his legal rights to do so if he feels that he's being unfairly targeted by investigators. Shortly after Randy Bryan's father died, Clint's lawyer wrote a private investigator involved in the case that he had learned that the official stance of the Columbus police was that Brian was actually alive. From this, it's possible that Brian is still alive and decided to start over new, and Clint knows about it. Though in the same vein, why would Brian run away from a successful life that he had worked so hard for? And why would he choose to do so just before he flew to Florida for a vacation with his soon-to-be fiancée? In the end, nothing about this case makes much sense, and is truly one where the person that disappeared did so without a trace. And the investigation is still ongoing 16 years later at the end of this video. At this point, everyone that was involved with Brian has moved on. His girlfriend graduated and got married. His brother got married to his longtime girlfriend. Clint moved out of state. The house he grew up in and his apartment sit empty. And his father had since passed away. While there are people out there that still look at this case and try to find the answers, odds are we'll never have definitive evidence about what happened to Brian Schaffer.
So this was a collection of 2 missing persons cases that, to this day, are still unsolved. A huge thank you to Curious Raven for helping me out on this video. She is an amazing person, an amazing narrator, and very, very good friend of mine. Please do check her out and show her the love that you always show me. It was honestly an honor to have her on this video. In 2020 alone, there were over 540,000 missing people reported in the United States, and endless resources and hours put into locating them. Unfortunately, there are some that are never found, and sometimes we don't get the closure we so desperately need. These were 2 of those cases that do not have answers, and at this point have almost no new information to go on. If you did enjoy this video and would like more like this, please do consider subscribing to the channel, as I am working on content like this and much more. Also, consider hitting that thumbs up button to help the channel grow, and leave me a comment letting me know your thoughts. As always, I hope you have a lovely night, and I hope to see you next time. But until then, keep your eyes open.